On March 12, 2019, at 9:47 in the morning, a 68-year-old man named Earl Hutchins walked into Riverside, New Holland in Mitchell, South Dakota, to do something he'd done successfully 9 times before over the course of 44 years. He was there to finance a tractor. Not for himself, for his grandson. The machine was a New Holland Boomer 47, a compact utility tractor, 47 horsepower with a loader. Nothing extravagant. The kind of machine a young man starting a small livestock operation might use to move hay, clear snow, grade a driveway. The price, with the loader and a 3-year warranty, came to $28,400. Earl had brought a check for $8,000 as a down payment. He'd brought his tax returns from the previous 3 years. He'd brought a handwritten list of every New Holland machine he and his father had purchased since 1975. 9 tractors, 2 balers, 1 combine, all bought from this dealership or its predecessor. He'd brought a payment history that showed 44 years without a single late installment. He sat across from a man named Dennis Kohler, who'd sold him his last 3 tractors and had worked at Riverside, New Holland for 19 years. Dennis entered the information into the system. The application went to a regional credit office in Omaha, a centralized department that had been implemented 18 months earlier as part of a corporate restructuring. The old system, where Dennis could approve loans up to $50,000 based on relationship and local knowledge, had been replaced by algorithmic underwriting and standardized risk models. At 10:23 a.m., the response came back. Denied. The reason code cited insufficient diversified income, applicant age risk, and projected equipment utilization below threshold parameters. Dennis stared at the screen for a long time before he said anything. If you've farmed long enough to remember when a handshake meant something, or when your word carried weight because your father's word had carried weight, or when the man who sold you a tractor knew your land and your situation and your character, then you might understand why some stories matter more than others. This one matters because it's about what happens when that world meets a different one. A world that measures risk in data points and makes decisions in offices 200 miles away. If that tension means something to you, we'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. Not because we're chasing numbers, but because these stories deserve to be remembered by people who understand what's being lost. Earl Hutchins had been born in 1951 on a farm 7 miles west of Mitchell. His father, Clayton, had farmed 480 acres of corn and soybeans and raised Hereford cattle. Clayton had bought his first New Holland baler in 1975, a Model 273, and when it performed well, he'd bought a New Holland tractor 2 years later. Then another, then a combine. When Earl took over the operation in 1989, he'd continued that relationship. Not out of blind loyalty, but because the equipment had proven itself and because the dealership, then called Kohler Implement, before it was bought and renamed Riverside, New Holland, had always treated him fairly. In 44 years, Earl had financed 9 tractors. He'd paid off every loan early or on time. He'd never asked for a payment extension. He'd never missed a service appointment. He'd weathered the farm crisis of the 1980s, the commodity collapse of 1998, the recession of 2008, and the price drops of 2014 and 2015. He was 68 years old. His wife, Linda, had passed away in 2016. He had one daughter, Rebecca, who'd moved to Sioux Falls and worked as a nurse. Rebecca had a son named Kyle, who was 23 years old. Kyle had grown up visiting the farm every summer. He'd learned to drive a tractor at 12. He'd helped with harvest every year from age 14 onward. In 2018, after 2 years working construction in Sioux Falls, Kyle told his grandfather he wanted to try farming. Not big row crops, but something smaller. Pasture-raised chickens, maybe some goats, vegetables for farmers markets. He'd saved $11,000. He'd found 80 acres to rent near Plankinton, about 20 miles west. Earl had offered to co-sign for a small tractor. Not to give Kyle everything, but to give him a start. The Boomer 47 wasn't a machine that would impress anyone. It was the kind of tractor a young man could learn on, maintain himself, and use for 10 years without regret. When Dennis Kohler told Earl the application had been denied, Earl didn't raise his voice. He asked why. Dennis read the codes. Insufficient diversified income, Kyle's work history was sporadic. Applicant age risk, Earl was 68. Projected equipment utilization below threshold, the system had flagged that a 47-horsepower compact tractor on 80 rented acres didn't meet minimum usage algorithms for financed equipment. Earl asked if Dennis could override it. Dennis said he couldn't. The centralized system didn't allow dealer overrides anymore. He could submit an appeal, but it would go to the same office, and in his experience, appeals were rarely approved. Earl asked if the fact that he'd paid off 9 tractors over 44 years counted for anything. Dennis said it should, but the new system didn't weigh legacy relationships the way the old one had. It calculated risk based on current financial snapshots and predictive models. Earl sat quietly for a moment. Then he stood up, thanked Dennis, and walked out. He drove home. He didn't tell Kyle what had happened. He didn't call his daughter. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time, looking at the list he'd written, the list of every New Holland machine his family had bought since 1975. That afternoon, he called a man named Vernon Dietrich, who farmed 600 acres south of Mitchell and had known Earl since 1971. Earl told him what had happened. Vernon didn't say much. He just listened. The next morning, Vernon called 2 other farmers. He told them the story. He didn't suggest anything. He just told them. By the end of that day, 12 people knew. By the evening of March 13th, 31 people knew. None of them organized anything. There were no meetings, no phone trees, no social media posts. But on the morning of March 15th, 2019, 72 hours after Earl Hutchins had been denied financing, 47 New Holland tractors arrived at Riverside, New Holland in Mitchell, South Dakota. They didn't arrive all at once. The first one pulled into the lot at 6:47 a.m., just as the sun was coming up. It was a New Holland T7.270, owned by a man named Carl Jennings, who farmed near Alexandria. He parked it in the front row of the lot, facing the building, and shut off the engine. He didn't get out. He sat in the cab for a moment, then climbed down, locked the door, and walked to his truck, which his wife had followed him in. They drove away. At 7:02, 2 more tractors arrived, a TM150 and a T6175. Both drivers parked them next to Carl's machine, shut them off, and left. By 7:30, there were 11 tractors. By 8:15, there were 23. Dennis Kohler arrived at 8 a.m., the way he always did. When he pulled into the parking lot, he saw the tractors, arranged in neat rows, all New Holland, all facing the building. He sat in his truck for a long time before he went inside. By 9 a.m., the dealership's owner, a man named Tom Riverside, whose father had started the business in 1973, came out to look. He stood in the lot, surrounded by silent machines, and didn't say anything. By 10:30 a.m., there were 38 tractors. By noon, there were 47. No one was shouting. No one was holding signs. No one had called the news. The tractors just sat there, lined up, engines off, empty. Some were new, T7 and T8 models with less than 500 hours. Some were older, TM and TS series from the early 2000s. A few were vintage, a 7740 from 1997, a TW25 from 1982. Every one of them was a New Holland. Every one of them had been driven there by someone who'd bought it from Riverside, New Holland, or its predecessor. And every one of them had been left there as a statement that didn't need words. Tom Riverside called the regional sales manager in Omaha at 12:47 p.m. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Tom explained what was happening. He explained that 47 tractors, representing roughly $4.2 million in equipment, most of it financed through New Holland Financial, were now sitting in his lot, and that the farmers who owned them had parked them there in response to a denied loan application. The regional manager asked if there was a protest forming. Tom said no, there was no protest. There were just tractors, and silence. The regional manager asked what Tom wanted him to do. Tom said he wanted the loan approved. The regional manager said that wasn't how the system worked. The application had been evaluated by the credit department using standardized criteria. The decision was final unless the applicant's financial situation changed or new information was provided. Tom said the new information was that 47 farmers had driven their tractors to his dealership and left them there. The regional manager said that wasn't relevant to the underwriting process. Tom said if the loan wasn't approved, he didn't know what would happen next, but he knew it wouldn't be good for anyone. The regional manager said he'd bring it up in a meeting. Tom asked when. The regional manager said he didn't know. Tom hung up. He walked back outside. The tractors were still there. More people had started to gather, not farmers, just townspeople, walking over to see what was happening. No one was talking much. They were just looking. At 2:15 p.m., a local reporter from the Mitchell Daily Republic showed up. She asked Tom what was going on. Tom said he couldn't comment. She asked if she could take pictures. Tom said she could do whatever she wanted. It was a public lot. The pictures ran in the next day's paper. 47 tractors, all New Holland, all silent. The headline read, "Tractors gather at local dealership, reason unclear." By the evening of March 15th, Earl Hutchins had heard what had happened. Vernon Dietrich called him at 6:30 p.m. and told him to drive into town. Earl asked why. Vernon said, "Just go look." Earl drove into Mitchell. When he pulled into the Riverside New Holland lot, he saw the tractors. He sat in his truck for a long time, staring at them. He recognized some of them. Carl Jennings' T7 Vernon's TM150, a T6 175 that belonged to a man named Duane Voss, who Earl had known since high school. He got out of his truck and walked through the rows. He didn't touch anything. He just walked. At the far end of the lot, he saw Tom Riverside standing by himself. Earl walked over. Tom said, "I didn't ask them to do this." Earl said, "I know." Tom said, "I'm trying to fix it." Earl said, "I appreciate that." They stood there for a moment, not saying anything. Then Tom said, "The system doesn't work the way it used to." Earl said, "I know that too." Tom said, "I don't know if this will change anything." Earl said, "Neither do I." Earl drove home. He still didn't call Kyle. He didn't know what to say yet. On March 16th, the tractors were still there. On March 17th, they were still there. No one moved them. No one started them. They just sat. The dealership stayed open. Customers came and went. Service appointments continued. But the sales floor was quiet, and the lot, normally a showcase of available inventory, was blocked by 47 machines that weren't for sale. On March 18th, a man from New Holland's corporate communications office in Pennsylvania called Tom Riverside. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. The man from corporate said the situation had been brought to senior leadership's attention. He said the company valued its dealer relationships and its customer relationships. He said New Holland was committed to finding solutions that balanced risk management with customer service. Tom asked if that meant the loan would be approved. The man said it meant they were reviewing the situation. Tom asked when. The man said soon. Tom said the tractors were still there, and they would stay there until something changed. The man said he understood. On March 19th, at 10:15 a.m., Dennis Kohler received an email from the regional credit office. The subject line read, "Application Haber NH 2009-03847, status update." The email said that upon further review, the application for Earl Hutchins and Kyle Hutchins had been approved under modified terms. The down payment would need to be increased to $10,000, and the loan term would be shortened to 48 months instead of 60, but the financing was approved. Dennis printed the email and walked out to the lot. Tom Riverside was standing near the front row of tractors, talking to a farmer who'd come to pick up a part. Dennis handed him the printout. Tom read it. He didn't smile, he just nodded. He called Earl Hutchins at 10:47 a.m. Earl answered on the second ring. Tom said, "It's approved." Earl didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "What changed?" Tom said, "I think you know." Earl said, "I didn't ask anyone to do that." Tom said, "I know, but they did it anyway." Earl asked about the terms. Tom told him. Earl said he could manage the extra $2,000 down in the shorter term. Tom said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll finish the paperwork." Earl said, "What about the tractors?" Tom said, "I'm making calls now." By noon on March 19th, the farmers started coming back. Carl Jennings arrived first. He climbed into his T7 270, started it, and drove it off the lot. He didn't wave, he didn't stop to talk. He just left. One by one, the others came. Some arrived alone, some came in pairs. By 4:30 p.m., 39 of the tractors were gone. By 6 p.m., all 47 were gone. The lot was empty again. The dealership looked like it always had, except it didn't. Not really. On March 20th, 2019, Earl Hutchins and his grandson Kyle walked into Riverside, New Holland and signed the paperwork for a New Holland Boomer 47. Dennis Kohler processed the loan. Tom Riverside came out to shake their hands. Earl asked if there would be any problems with the corporate office. Tom said he didn't think so. He said the decision had been made, and as far as he knew, it was final. Kyle asked if his grandfather had done something to make this happen. Earl said no. He said other people had done something, and he didn't fully understand why, but he was grateful. The tractor was delivered on March 23rd. Kyle used it to clear brush on the 80 acres he'd rented. He used it to move hay. He used it to build chicken coops and grade a driveway and drag a pasture. In the first year, he raised 400 chickens and sold eggs at 2 farmers markets. He broke even. In the second year, he added goats and expanded to 3 markets. He made $11,000. In the third year, he paid off the tractor loan early. But this story isn't really about Kyle. It's not even really about Earl. It's about what happened in Mitchell, South Dakota over the course of 4 days in March 2019, when 47 farmers decided that something mattered more than convenience. None of them organized it. None of them planned it. There were no meetings, no strategy sessions, no demands. They just showed up. They parked their tractors, and they waited. They didn't do it because Earl Hutchins was a hero. They did it because he was one of them, a man who'd farmed his whole life, who'd honored his commitments, who'd been treated like a number instead of a neighbor. And when a system that didn't know him decided he wasn't worth the risk, they decided the system was wrong. Not with anger, not with speeches, just with presence. 47 tractors, all New Holland, all silent. It wasn't a protest. It was a reminder that relationships aren't built in spreadsheets, that loyalty isn't a data point, that some things, trust, history, reputation, can't be measured by an algorithm, and that when those things are ignored, people notice. In the months that followed, the tractors incident, as it came to be called, was never mentioned in any official New Holland communications. There were no press releases, no apologies, no policy changes announced. But something did change. In May 2019, the Regional Credit Office in Omaha sent a memo to all dealers in the Upper Midwest. The memo outlined new guidelines for appeals and exceptions. It reinstated limited dealer override authority for applicants with verified long-term payment histories. It allowed for character references and local economic context to be included in underwriting reviews. The memo didn't mention Mitchell. It didn't mention Earl Hutchins. It didn't mention 47 tractors. But every dealer who read it knew exactly why it existed. Tom Riverside kept a copy of the memo in his desk drawer. He didn't frame it, he didn't show it to anyone, but he kept it. Dennis Kohler processed 6 more loans in 2019 that under the old centralized system would have been denied. All 6 were approved. Earl Hutchins kept farming. He turned 70 in 2021. He scaled back his operation, leasing out some of his land, keeping enough acres to stay busy. Kyle expanded his livestock operation. By 2023, he was running 120 acres, raising chickens, goats, and pastured pigs. He bought a second tractor, a used New Holland T4.75, at auction in 2022. The Boomer 47 was still running. It had 1,847 hours on it. Kyle had replaced the battery once and the hydraulic fluid twice. Everything else was original. But the real consequence of March 2019 wasn't about one tractor or one loan. It was about what didn't happen afterward. In the 2 years before the tractors incident, Riverside, New Holland had averaged 23 new tractor sales per year. In 2019, after the incident, they sold 34. In 2020, they sold 41. In 2021, they sold 38. Some of that was market conditions. Some of it was commodity prices. But some of it, maybe most of it, was something else. It was the knowledge that when something had gone wrong, the dealership had tried to fix it. And when the system had failed, the community had responded. And when 47 farmers had parked their tractors in silence, the message had been heard. That mattered. Not because it was dramatic, not because it made headlines, but because it proved that in a world increasingly run by algorithms and risk models and centralized decision-making, there were still places where people knew each other, where history counted, where a handshake and a payment record and 44 years of showing up meant something. And when those things were threatened, people defended them. Quietly, without spectacle, but unmistakably. 5 years later, in March 2024, Earl Hutchins turned 73. He still farmed, not as much. His daughter, Rebecca, had started coming back to the farm more often, bringing her 2 younger children. Kyle was talking about buying land of his own. One Saturday morning, Earl drove into Mitchell to pick up a part for his planter. He stopped by Riverside, New Holland. Dennis Kohler was at the counter. They talked about the weather, about planting forecasts, about fuel prices. As Earl was leaving, Dennis said, "You ever think about what happened back in 2019? Earl said, "Sometimes." Dennis said, "I still don't know how they all knew to show up." Earl said, "I don't either." Dennis said, "You ever thank them?" Earl said, "I wouldn't know who to thank. There were 47 of them." Dennis smiled. He said, "I think they know." Earl nodded. He walked out to his truck. As he drove home, he passed a field where a New Holland T7 was working, planting corn. He didn't know who owned it, but he recognized the machine. It might have been one of the 47, or it might not have been. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was still there, still working, still part of a community that had decided 5 years ago that some things were worth defending. Not with anger, not with speeches, just with presence. 47 tractors, all New Holland, all silent. And in that silence, a message that couldn't be ignored. That when a system forgets what matters, people remember. That when algorithms replace judgment, communities respond. And that loyalty, real loyalty, built over decades, earned through reliability and service and showing up year after year, isn't something that can be calculated or denied. It's something that either exists or it doesn't. And when it does, it doesn't disappear because a computer says it should. It endures. The New Holland Boomer 47 that Kyle Hutchins financed in March 2019 is still running. It has 2,214 hours on it now. It starts every time. It does the work it was built to do. It's not a remarkable machine. It's not the most powerful or the most advanced. It won't set records or win awards, but it represents something that matters more than power or technology. It represents a decision that was almost denied, a loan that was almost rejected, a future that almost didn't happen. And it represents 47 farmers who decided that one man's rejection was everyone's problem. Not because they were heroes, not because they were organized, but because they remembered what it felt like to be treated like a number instead of a neighbor. And they decided, quietly and without fanfare, that they wouldn't let that stand. They showed up. They parked their tractors, and they waited. And in doing so, they proved that even in a world of algorithms and centralized systems and risk models that reduce people to data points, there are still places where the old ways survive, where a man's word matters, where history counts, where showing up for 44 years means something, where a handshake is still worth more than a credit score, and where a community, when it needs to, can speak without saying a word. 47 tractors, all New Holland, all silent, and louder than any protest could ever be.